you think Australia should reduce its immigration number? Then keep watching to find out what three renowned Australians and I think of the topic. Hey there everyone, and welcome back to the Chamonix Show. Today we will be discussing whether Australia should reduce its immigration number, and I will tell you that I believe it certainly needs to do so. It needs to reduce its immigration number by the percentage of unemployed immigrants currently in Australia. I have represented hundreds of thousands of people in the past and helped them to have better circumstances, and with this policy I intend to do no different today. It will help future immigrants coming to Australia as well as current Australians living in the country. Before we jump in, I want to make sure that you are subscribed to this channel. If not, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to ensure that you will actually be notified when new videos are uploaded to my channel. Alright, let's dive in. Here is the episode that recently aired on Sky News.
Welcome back. Now it's time for The Big Idea. This is the segment where somebody comes into the studio and gives us their pitch on a big idea for a better Australia. But this is a show with a difference. You, the viewers at home, can let us know what you think of the big idea by voting on it. And you can do that by going onto Twitter and going to the Twitter handle @SkyNewsAustralia. There at the top of the screen you'll see a Twitter poll which you can vote yes, no or more work needed to. Now tonight's big idea asks the question, should Australia reduce its immigration intake? And you probably don't need me to tell you that that poll is already running hot. Now to give us the pitch on Australia cutting its immigration intake is Chamonix Terblanche, who is South African by birth but a proud Australian by choice. She's a former advisor to Palmer United Senator Dio Wang, and she's currently a councillor in the city of Coburn in Western Australia. Welcome to us from Perth tonight, Chamonix.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be on the show.
Now, we're going to be joined shortly by Stephen Conroy, Liberal Party President in Victoria, and, did I say Stephen Conroy?
The other way around.
Who was the other way around. Stephen Conroy, who is a former Labor senator and Labor power broker, and, of course, Michael Kroger, who needs no introduction. But before we get to them, give us the pitch. You've got the soapbox on why Australia should cut its immigration intake.
Thank you. Let me just start off by saying, Nick, this is not a policy about race, religion or Russian roulette. This is a policy about people's life and about being fair to everybody. It's about being fair to the current Australians that we have, and it's about being fair to those people that we might potentially allow to come into the country at a later stage based on their skill sets. It's a two-based approach, the policy. The first instance, we need to cut the immigration figure by the direct related unemployment rate of current immigrants that we have in Australia, whilst at the same time fixing the skilled occupation list, which is really not working and doing the job that it's supposed to be doing. We have so many people in Australia who come from other countries who put their life's hope in this new place that they're coming to. They come through the skills list, they think they're going to have jobs and work and provide for their families just to be here, not to be able to find a job. And that is not fair. We all know the disadvantages of having unemployment rates. We need to fix the system first. We need to have a proper skills occupation list on which we assess our people to come into this country. And if we do that, we'll be looking after our future Australians as well as our current Australians who are expecting the best of the system.
Just checking in for a moment. Are you following the pitch? Write "oh yes" in the comments below if that made sense to you. Now let's hear what the panellists are thinking.
It's a very good pitch, Chamonix. I'm dying to ask a lot of questions, but let's bring in our panel of political and policy experts, Michael Kroger and Stephen Conroy. Stephen, I think we'll let you go first tonight.
Look, I'm not a fan of the pitch, I'm afraid. I've debated this many times in Parliament and in politics over the last 20 years. And I think if you just want to start with the core economic issues, most of our economic growth over the last well, I'd say 5 years, but probably a lot longer, can be put down to the substantial immigration that we've had. And to pull a substantial amount of the immigration out of our system would cause quite a dip in our economic circumstances, the GDP growth. If you were to take away and do a calculation based on what would our GDP growth have been without the levels of immigration that we've had over the last 5 and 10 years, so I'm not being partisan in terms of Labor-Liberal on this one, just as looking at the statistics, you would find we have a fairly shocking performance. And so I think the economic growth that's generated by our immigration is vital to the country, and we need to bear that in mind when we start having these debates.
Shamini, can you respond to that economic concern that Stephen has raised?
Absolutely. I agree 100% that immigrants are vital to this country. I am one myself. Why would I not say that we need immigrants here? Immigrants are extremely important. But it is just as important to get the balance right of the number of immigrants that we allow into the country. If you have a lot of people fluxing into the country and they don't have anywhere to go, they don't have houses because they can't afford it, they don't have food to eat, that's not fair to them, that's not fair to the people that we have here either. If we get the system right, whereby the people who come in have the right skill sets that we need in this country, then the economic benefits will be much better than allowing people who will ultimately be out of a job.
Michael Kroger, keen to bring you in on this debate.
Well, look, Nick, I suppose, Shamini, my concern about the current rate is not in family reunion, which is 57, 58,000, but it's in the skilled migration area where we've got 120, 130,000 come in. We seem to have great shortages in Australia of categories like cooks and hairdressers, and I just wonder why Australia can't train more people in that field, and that troubles me. I don't think the categories of skilled migration are right. When you're talking about skills which can easily be learnt here by younger people or anyone really looking for a job in an industry. So my concern about the categories at the moment is that there are too many categories for low-skilled jobs which could easily be taken by people who live here but who are otherwise unemployed.
Shamini?
Absolutely. I spent 3 years doing my PhD on this, and I spent a number of years working in industry where I was actually employed as part of the people who put that skilled occupation list together. And I can tell you that there are much better ways to go about to get the data of the skills that we actually do need in Australia. At the moment, we use surveys, we use lag time methods of getting that data. It's just there are so many issues with the way that we gather our data at the moment to make up those skilled occupations lists. We need to use much more advanced methods. We need to introduce intelligence. We need to introduce artificial intelligence. There are just so many other better ways that we can use to get this list right so that we have the right people in the right jobs. And Michael, I agree 100% with you. If we get that list right and we know exactly the categories, there is no reason why we cannot train a lot of those people onshore.
So I want to pick up this thread around what cutting immigration would do to our economy and what it would mean for our welfare system as well, because you've touched on that, Shamini. I mean, look at Japan. They value their culture, the purity of their culture so highly that they don't really have any immigration. And economically, and for their welfare system, that's been a disaster. They haven't had any real economic growth in around 20 years. And now they've got a social welfare bill with their ageing population that they just don't have the young workers there generating the income to pay for it. So if we cut back Australia's immigration intake with all those young people, young workers coming into Australia, who's going to pay for all those increasing numbers of Australians who are getting old and will be dependent on the welfare system?
We definitely need to bring in diversity of people. There is no doubt that every cultural, society, environment, they all benefit from diversity. Definitely diversity needs to come in. So, unfortunately, I don't think Japan has gone upon the right way by not allowing people in from other countries. I think the best way is to make sure that you get a diverse number of people and skill sets and languages, even languages. I think that's incredibly important because that's the way that the world is. We are made up of such a diverse group of people. If we don't represent the makeup of the world, I don't think that Australia will have a long-term economic viability.
Look, I'm a little bit confused about the argument you two have put, because I actually haven't heard you argue for a reduction in immigration at all. Now, maybe I've misheard you, but you both said you just want to change the current mix and keep the same number. So I'm confused about whether you're advocating a reduction in the total level of migration or you're advocating a change in the mix. That's my first point. But secondly, even to go to this issue of the change in the mix, I think you make some terribly loaded assumptions about the family reunion / refugee intake. If you look at Australia's history, we have some incredibly wonderful stories of people coming here with nothing, no skills officially, no money. They've been fleeing war, whether they've been from Italy, whether from Greece, whether from the Holocaust, and they've come here and they have created wealth and prosperity for every Australian, even though they started with nothing. So I think you've got to be careful when you want to dismiss those who don't have skills and an obvious asset to this country, because you are stifling the sort of migrants and refugees that we've had over the years that have made extraordinary contributions to Australia.
Look, could I just jump in there, Nick, and make this comment that population growth in Australia is around 1.6%. That includes new births. So you get 1.6% growth in Australia. In France, it's 0.5. We've got 3 times the population growth of France. In America, it's 0.7. In Canada, it's 1%. So Australia is really the upper end of population growth. Is population growth a good thing? Yes, of course it is, particularly in a country as big as ours. The elephant in the room, of course, is that we seem to be having large numbers of our immigrant communities coming to Australia, as welcome as they are. They seem to be settling mainly in Melbourne and Sydney. And there's got to be a way that you know, the density of these cities is eased by ensuring that the migrants that come to Australia are dispersed in other areas of the country, because it's putting massive pressure on the infrastructure of Melbourne and Sydney, and everybody knows that. It's the elephant in the room, but everybody knows that. And if we're going to keep a high program, which many people leave, you know, let's make sure that the other cities and the country towns, etc., also have an influx, because a lot of those places do need new citizens.
Shamini, do you support the idea?
I would just like to go back to the comment that Stephen made earlier about me not supporting family reunions. When I started off my policy pitch, I said it's not about race, religion or any of those things. In fact, it's only about the skilled occupation list aspect of the immigration that I'm talking about. So I agree we need to have refugee intake. I agree we need to have family reunions. I have family members who've come into this country through family reunions. So I absolutely agree that that needs to be there. I'm not taking that. However, when we do allow people to come into the country under the category of skilled, we need to ensure that those people are actually skilled for the jobs that they're coming in for. And moreover, that there are actually jobs for them to do. That's not fair to allow people into this country where they believe that they're going to have jobs. They're coming to the land of milk and honey just to not have a job. There are so many people who's come as migrants to Australia on the skilled category and have had to leave Australia and now live in places like Qatar and, you know, just places where they never thought they'd end up because they cannot find jobs in Australia. So, yes, Stephen, I'm not touching that aspect. I think that's vitally important. I agree with you. Talking to somebody who English is my second language, as you know, I think that's really great for the country to have those, but I think we need to remove the proportion of unemployed immigrants, that figure, which is about 8.8% at the moment in Australia, so about 15,000 a year. That's the number that we need to reduce it by, and then make sure that the people that we do allow to come in for skills that we really need. That's the important part.
Thanks, Shamini. So there's two questions I want to make sure we get to. The first is, you talk about a percentage reduction there. Tony Abbott has recently called for a reduction of the immigration intake from 190,000 to 110,000. Does that number sound about right to you? And then secondly, I'd love to hear your response to Michael Kroger's point about settling new arrivals in different parts of Australia rather than just Sydney and Melbourne. So those two, if you could.
Yes. Absolutely agree. We need to settle people in different areas of Australia. If we all just stick to this major centres, we're going to lose all the valuable resources and, I guess, experiences that come from having rural areas, where there are a lot of people that need to live in rural areas because they work in those areas. For example, in WA, we have a lot of the FIFO happening. It would be much better if we can have those communities in the rural areas to flourish. And unfortunately, a lot of the time it's necessary to force people to live there because people who live in the cities already don't want to move out to the rural areas. So by having a migration program in place where for a number of years, let's say for your potential first 5 years of being in Australia, you live in a rural area or a remote community and then move afterwards, I think that's important because that will help the country a lot.
So it sounds like you support that idea. What about in terms of a number, 190 to 110,000?
Yes, I think that to me that's excessive. As I mentioned before, I think by 8.8% we need to cut it by, and so that's by about 15,000 people.
Okay. That's a tweak overall, but a cut nonetheless. All right, Shamini, you've put your case very well in a very spirited way tonight. Thank you for coming to us from Perth. We now need to get the verdict of our panellists. Stephen Conroy, you for it, against it, or more work needed?
No, look, I don't think I've been convinced by the argument. I think Michael's made some very valid points about how can we get a better distribution so that all of the migrants don't end up in one or two places. That does unfortunately mean that governments would have to fork out a lot more money to provide support services in those regional centres where they aren't at the moment. So that is for those who want to say, oh, we've got to save money, you have to spend more money if you want to decentralise like that. But I think it's absolutely
sometimes
should be on the table.
Sometimes you've got to spend money to gain money.
No, and that's my point. I think you're absolutely right about that. But no, overall, I'm not convinced. I think the economic consequences of the Tony Abbott-style reduction will be quite severe for Australia. A more modest cut, these things have gone up and down over the years. I've been in Cabinet when we've discussed it, when it's been higher. We've also brought it down. So there is room to move it up and down.
Tonight, 9th of March, yes or no to a cut in immigration? Stephen?
No, I don't.
Michael Kroger?
Well, I'm partly convinced because, and I'd have to have a look at the numbers in more detail, but I am worried about the categories of jobs which could be filled by people here if they were trained properly. And I don't understand why we need to bring what we call low-skilled migrants to Australia when I'm sure those jobs could be done by people if they were given the opportunity. So, one would have to look at all the categories, but I'm not convinced that all those categories are needed at the minute, quite frankly.
So the question is, Australia should reduce its immigration intake. Are you a yes or no? Or
I'm for reducing in those categories where those jobs could be done by people here.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. And look, I'm a no on this one. I think we've probably got the intake about right at the moment, but I think you've made some very valid points, Shamini, and I do think there's a case for looking at the mix for certain. So there you go, you have it, the panel. There was two no's, one yes, and of course viewers at home get to vote on this as well. They can do that by going on to Twitter at Sky News Australia, vote in the Twitter poll, and we'll let everyone know the results at the end of the show. Thank you so much, Shamini. I'm back with Michael and Stephen after the break. Stick around for that.
So do you agree that Australia should reduce its immigration number by the percentage of unemployed immigrants currently in Australia? Write your ideas or your comments below this video and be courteous to each other when engaging in this healthy debate. If you like this topic, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already, share it with a friend, and remember to go after the life that you want. You only have one go at it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.